Did you ever have a moment of evil genius that you actually went through with? When I was in high school during my second hour physics class, I routinely had a bottle of Sprite with me. Every day the kid behind me would wait for me to get up and then would grab it and chug half of it as fast as he could. So one day I took it home and filled it back up with white vinegar and brought it with me the next day. As usual, I wandered off. When I knew he was looking, he grabbed it, started chugging, and immediately ran to the sink and threw up. I laughed my ass off for a while. He had to try and explain himself to the teacher, and my Sprite went unmolested for the rest of the semester. In college, I lived with 5 other gay guys in a 6-bedroom house. It was known as the gay house. One full afternoon I got home from class to find my favorite roommate Josh crying in the kitchen. He had just found out that his boyfriend Kevin was living a double life. They had been dating for 3 months. Kevin came to our house parties and to movie nights, and we all thought he was a nice, cute guy. He told us he was closeted because his filthy rich parents would have cut him off if he came out. It had happened to his older brother. Even though most of the house was fully out, we respected him and were sympathetic to his situation. We live in the Bible Belt, after all. Turns out, Kevin was an alias. His real name was Brad. He was engaged to a chick, a cheerleader, and his best friends were a group of homophobic college Republicans who had no idea he was queer. I probably could have forgiven him for all that. I've forgiven worse, but he was unthinkably cruel to Josh when he decided to break it off. Among other things, he laughed at Josh and told him he had just been using him for sex, that he couldn't stand being around his fag friends, and to never call him again. The lying motherfucker preyed on Josh and actually enjoyed using and hurting him. Fuck that. He needed to be confronted. I'm 6'6" and 220 lbs. I've always taken my size for granted, knowing I'm not a likely gay bash target. I used to dress up in campy/trash drag and show up to the local roughneck bar on ladies' drink-free night and not give a fuck. I went with Josh to confront the evil motherfucker, and as Josh and I walked up towards Kevin's apartment that night, it was clear he was throwing a party. It obviously wasn't an ideal moment to confront him. That's when my vodka-fueled stroke of evil genius kicked in. We went back to the gay house, home, and formulated a plan. Josh had several of Kevin's nude pictures. Everything from asshole shots to dick pics, and many stupid-faced pics of him trying to look sexy in a thong. He also had several articles of Kevin's clothing and underwear. While one roommate was printing copies of those XXX photos and another was creating a moonfruit website and registering a domain and printing invitations to the site with a giant picture of him in a thong with a derpy face, I was dressing up in tranny drag. I had an old 80s prom dress with blue sequins falling off. It cut off just below my underwear, and you could see my untucked bulge if I lifted my shoulders. The ratty blonde wig was a leftover from a friend's played with / worn out Barbie costume, and I squeezed my feet into 6-inch heels that I found in size 16 women at the Ghetto Payless shoe store 2 weeks prior. I painted myself with way too much makeup, but didn't shave my stubble and didn't shave my legs or wear leggings. I looked tranny-licious. We stuffed his clothes, the invitations, and the freshly printed XXX pics into a large purse, and I set off for the party, clutching a half-empty liter of Kettle One in one hand and the purse in the other, and made one stop at Walmart to buy a $20 fake wedding ring. I deserve an Oscar for my performance that night. You should have seen the look on his face when a 7-foot drag queen barged in and stormed through his apartment screaming and crying. The whole place just froze as I made my way past everyone and into the kitchen to find him and his fiancée standing by the back door staring at me in shock. I'm sure he didn't recognize me. I sobbed at the top of my lungs and begged him to come back to me, then started describing all the things I love about him, even his cute little skin tag on the base of his penis and the mole on his left ass cheek. I've been a stage performer most of my life, so I understand projection. I was loud. The whole party heard everything. My makeup smeared, tears turned angry, and I started telling them all vivid details of his sex life. I described his sexual fetishes. Josh was happy to share them with me, and after several awkward moments of him pretending to have no idea who I was, his fiancée started questioning me. At that point, I pulled his clothes out of the purse and threw them at him. She immediately recognized the underwear as his. Then I pulled out the XXX pics and handed them to her before I bursted into uncontrollable sobbing and stormed out of the kitchen and through the living room partiers and toward the front door. At the door, I stopped, took a long swig of vodka, then threw a giant stack of party invitations all over the place. They had the worst pic of all, him making the derpiest sexy face in a shiny thong, and the invitation was to some fucked up website my roommate created to out Kevin. I don't remember the URL, but it was funny. There were no XXX pics on the site, but there was a forum for people to share different ways he lied to them and have general discussions about how much they hated him. Before I walked out of the apartment, I spun around and dramatically removed and held up the fake wedding ring for everyone to see. I pointed at his fiancée on the other side of the apartment and said, "I see he gave you one of these too. Fuck you." And I threw it out into the front yard and walked out. Later that night, the roommates made sure to put a website invitation on every car in his apartment complex. Nobody in the gay community saw or heard from that guy again, though there were several rumors, including one that he transferred to a shittier school far away. While working at my serving job, a little girl asked for a Sprite, and I told her sure thing. On my way back to the kitchen, I then remembered that we only had Pepsi products and used Sierra Mist instead of Sprite. I brought her the Sierra Mist without saying anything because she's just a kid, she won't notice, right? I came back later to check up on them and asked if she'd like a refill. She said yes. I laughed devilishly in my head knowing she had no idea she didn't get a Sprite. The fool. She had no fucking idea. God, I get a rush just thinking about it. Oh, mine's evil. My kids were behaving terribly just before Christmas, and, before I had time to think, I said, "If you don't behave, I'll throw away a Christmas present." The threat worked, but not for long, because they called my bluff. So one night, as I was scrubbing the marker off my walls, I wrapped an empty box in Christmas paper and put it under the tree. The next day, they did something naughty and I threw that fucker away. Not only were they good that December, but every Christmas season since. Maybe this applies. I worked for a large multinational company that makes bleach. The entire department, 150 plus people, were told their jobs had been outsourced to Costa Rica via HP. Oh, and we had to train our replacements. Joy. The particular function I was in took me a year to learn, and I'm not stupid. There were 7 of us in this department. They gave us 2 weeks to train our replacements. Yeah, you see where this is going? Majority of the time our replacements were there, they were glued to YouTube. We explained many times to those who would care that these people were not getting it and didn't care they weren't getting it. It was generally taken that we were just trying to keep our jobs. Fast forward to 6 weeks after we had been let go. Each of us gets a semi-panic/pleaful call from someone at the bleach company basically saying help. In the 6 weeks since we left, HP had let the requests back up to over 6 times what we normally had in queue. 6 times the amount. Well, we all got together for lunch and discussed. I had gotten a new job by this point and wanted to stay. I recommended they each call HP back and say sure, I'll help. $100/HR wonderfully, they all did. End of the story. 3 people were brought back as contractors for 3 years, making 3 to 4 times where they were paid as employees. Mission accomplished. This was not exactly evil, but was definitely a manifestation of my lukewarm hatred for the targeted individuals. When I was growing up, I had a best friend, Chris, who would come stay over for a week or so at a time. I rarely saw him, and we lived very far apart, so these extended visits were the only time I spent with him. Also, I lived in a very rural area, so reaching my house was difficult. During one of these visits, when we were both 11, I learned that 2 other boys, some of our closest neighbors from about 20 minutes up the road, brothers and sons of a good friend of my mom's, would be joining us for lunch one day, so our moms could visit. With days to plan, and hundreds of acres of forest, a tree house, and 11-year-old imagination at our disposal, we hatched a plot. Let me first explain why these brothers warranted such a hostile welcome. They were rich, spoiled brats, and were the most entitled individuals I had ever met. The older one, 13, considered himself a rapper, and went so far as to have his daddy keep his precious lyrics in a safe because he was convinced he would be famous one day. This is the kind of kid that uses nigger as a space filler, even though he's as white as they come, and would steal things from other kids, including my favorite World Industries tech deck. I will never forget that, just because he thought he was a little thug. The younger one wasn't nearly as bad, but tried to emulate his brother, and thus could also be a shitfuck of incredible magnitude. Anyway, Chris and I decided to send them on a scavenger hunt of sorts, the goal of which would be to find us. We hid clues to our location all over the property. We lured them in by placing a walkie-talkie in my treehouse, which is near our driveway. As they got out of their car, they heard our voices coming from the treehouse, though we were at a vantage point high in a redwood tree a good distance away. Chris, who even at 11 was incredibly athletic, was able to lock the fort from the inside. It had a trapdoor, and shimmy his way down. From there we explained to them that, if they wanted us to come down, they would have to play our little game. They totally bought it, and proceeded to fight their way through thick brush to the remote locations in which we had hidden clues. They were completely covered in thorns and stickers that are extremely uncomfortable. There must have been a dozen clues, and they obediently sought each one. Over the next couple hours, we fought back laughter from our vantage point high in a tree as we watched them become extremely frustrated with our antics. They would regularly return to the treehouse and loudly plead for us to come down before begrudgingly returning to the hunt. By the time they had made it through the clues, their mom was ready to go, and we never actually had to interact with them, and we watched them climb back into their pristine BMW 5 Series covered in thorns, red in the face with frustration, and utterly exhausted. I still rate this among my greatest accomplishments. When I was a small child, roughly 6 or 7, I somehow ingeniously concocted a plan to freak my babysitter out. She set me down for a nap. When she came to get me, I pretended not to wake up. I pretended not to wake up when she shook me. I pretended not to wake up when she called my dad. I pretended not to wake up when she called 911. I pretended not to wake up when she dumped me in a tub full of freezing water. I winked at my younger sister from the freezing tub when the babysitter ran from the room to talk more with 911. I pretended not to wake up when she carried me naked downstairs. Finally, I gave it up when I realized the living room is filled with EMTs, police officers, and firefighters. Not me, but a friend back in first grade did this. It was art time, so everyone was making shapes out of clay. His creations kept getting smashed by the class bully. This stopped after he embedded a needle inside his clay volcano. It went through the bully's hand. Friend got in trouble. It was worth it, he said. Being a special ed kid, I had my share of abuse, and for the most part got used to it. One day in my sophomore year of high school, one of the jocks knocked my lunch tray on the floor as I was heading for a table, and he stood there with a few of his friends saying, "Eat it off the floor like a good little retard." I just quietly stood up and walked away as they continued yelling at me and saying, "Come back here, you retard." At that point my hunger kicked in, so I went back to the lunch counter and got another lunch and went to the table, and that jock came back with his friends and had his friends hold me down as he spit all over my lunch. Then he grabbed the tray and dumped all the spit covered food on my lap and said, "Oh, the little retard had an accident." I later walked over to his truck and poured sugar in the gas tank. A week later his parents bought him a brand new F250 pickup. He had some nice brand new shiny chrome rims in the back, so he got to come back one day to find one of the rims on his driver's seat covered in glass that used to be his windshield. I also had fun rolling the other 3 down the hill behind his truck and into the swamp. One day he beat the shit out of one of my good friends. That's when I went into full on rage mode. I didn't want to get my ass kicked, and I figured that if I kept fucking with his truck he'd figure out who was doing it. So instead of doing anything directly to him, I just started fucking with him more and more and watching him get all pissed off since he couldn't figure out who was doing all these things. I ended up peeling off the blades on his windshield wipers on a rainy day, dumping the liquid from a stink bomb in through the vent on his gym locker, etc. Until one day when his abuse was really bad. So I found out through the grapevine that he was cheating in all of his classes, so whenever we had a test, I would notice that he had all the answers written on his palms. So just before the final exam I took a shit in the toilet and took a pencil and stuck it right into the shit, then put it on his desk. When the exam was about to start he said he had to go to the bathroom, where he washed his hands. The look on his face when he looked at his hand for the answer was priceless. He ended up failing. Also, more recently a guy was hitting on my friend girl at a bar. She had just lost her brother to a car accident, and I was trying to cheer her up. The guy kept making passes, even when she waved him off. Then at one point the guy says, "Come on, let's go to my place. You gotta enjoy life while you can. You could die anytime." Just like that prick who hit the pole on 108 the other night. The prick was her brother. As we were leaving we saw that guy closing the door to his truck and walking back to the bar when he looked at my friend and said "You're a cunt anyway" and went inside. I ended up succeeding in my quest to cheer her up when I pulled out my Leatherman and took off all 4 of his valve stems. In college I was sharing a dorm room with 2 of my best friends from high school. I love my friends like brothers, but we could be dicks to one another pretty badly. Chris unfortunately crossed a line and unleashed the fucking fury with me when he popped the lock on our bathroom and snapped a Polaroid picture of me while I was on the john one night. He then tossed said photo out the window of our 13th floor dorm room for anybody to find. In the days that followed I learned to pop the lock on our shower door. It was basically a closet size room with only a shower, and also set about getting several pitchers of water to nearly freezing temperatures, just cold enough that ice started to form on the surface. I bided my time. Eventually Chris went to take one of his weekly spa showers, where he said he cranked the hot water on full and basically just sat under it for about an hour. I waited a bit for him to hit the hottest water temperature, then I rallied the rest of my dormmates, handed out pitchers of ice water, then quietly popped the lock and opened the door to the shower. In hindsight we probably could have killed him by dumping ice water on him when he was as hot as he was, but at the time hearing him scream like a little girl and fall down in the shower was well worth it. I think I was in kindergarten. It was group reading time, and we were all reading our books, and the kids who got their books the fastest generally got their choice of seating. The beanbags were of course the choicest spots, reserved for those who could read well enough and get there in time. Today, I was swift enough to secure my spot amongst this elite group of comfort hogs, edging out one of the regular sitters. Naturally, he was miffed, and, being the gym teacher's kid, he thought himself entitled. When no seat was relinquished to his royal gingerness, he started getting pesky. Then he got annoying. Finally his actions turned infuriating. Things such as smacking my book into my face, lifting up girls' skirts, screaming in our ears. I was absolutely tired of this little fuck's actions, so I Captain America'd my book right into his little freckled face. Then, after getting sent to the principal's office, got the big boss to make him to apologize to me.